for a long time, going back to when I started working for Mayor Harris. Actually, even before that, when I started for the Montclair in 1993 through 96, and Al Sal invited me to cover the Raiders as part of my Montclarian work. And that's how I got to know George. George is not someone you ever forget. George is a very nice person. He is very direct, not in a mean way, but when he says something to you, it's sincere. And he's got a great memory. And I have always heard him speak about people in ways that are candid but never mean, if you understand what I'm saying. In other words, never vindictive. Um, that doesn't mean that he wasn't the kind of person who would tell you the truth about someone if they were not doing something right. Okay? Uh, George was always straight with you, but I've never in my life talked to George where he was so mad about anything that he lost his temper or raised his voice. He was always in control. I can't remember a single time. There are a lot of times where I've seen him out of control. Of course, you know, we all have our moments. We're human, but not him. What George was, along with Skip Thomas, they call him Dr. Death, were two of the hardest hitting safeties in NFL history. And I believe that aspect of their game should be talked about. They are part of what made pro football popular. That part that people don't want to talk about why they watch, but then they react with, "Oh, did you see that?" or something like that. Well, the person delivering the oohs and ahs and the hits were George Atkinson, Skip Thomas, and Jack Tatum for the Raiders. Those three gentlemen, along with Phil Villapiano at linebacker and Ted Hendricks, the Mad Stork, and Monty Johnson, and a whole those are the ones that I primarily think of because they were the part of the nucleus that won the first Super Bowl for Oakland and the Raiders. And I say just like that because the Raiders were so much a part of Oakland. You see, Otis Sistrunk, the man you may know of as the man who went to University of Mars, is a friend of mine, a friend of my mom's. I met him when I was 1975, and I was all of 14 years old, 15 years old. And oh, 14, yeah, 62, 72, 10, 11, 12, 13, 13 years old. And George was a great friend of Otis Sistrunk. Um, and in those days in Oakland, not that it's not the same today, it is, but the internet has a way of dividing people. But in those days, there was no internet. And Oakland was a very accessible town, even though it was larger than San Francisco. Because of the way Oakland's laid out, it's very easy to get to know a lot of people in a very short period of time. Um, a lot of those people were Raiders because they went to the restaurants in town, they lived in town, they were part of the fabric of Oakland's culture. And George was one of those people. Gene Upshaw, Marvin Upshaw, Ken Stabler, um, Fred Bolitnikoff. The net list goes on and on and on. And they were some of the nicest people you ever want to know. Very giving, very funny, very friendly. And George was certainly all that. He goes, "Man, Zenny, I tell you about, and then he'd talk about something that happened or something. I'm not even going to mention about somebody that isn't even going to, uh, the point of the story, but I still want to blurt something out, but I'm not going to do it. Uh, George, but I always believe that George also never got his due. He should be in the NFL Hall of Fame. He the NFL should embrace fully the kind of game that it put on the field that created these men as popular figures in American culture. And that's what George Atkinson has been for so many years. I don't believe that should be swept under the rug at all. These were the days when the players not only wore pads, but in the case of Raider defenders, they put they took those pads and they created the cast. Phil Villapiano will tell you about it. They would dip them into with some sort of type of dye, not dye, mold, right? And make something really hard so they could give you a forearm shiver and keep the strong safeties were great at keeping tight ends in check that way. And George Atkinson was arguably among the best, more than among the best. All right, at it. That was the game. That was the way when George says it was a man's game and that's the way football was played and should be played. That's what he's talking about. And when you watch the NFL films, um, highlights with John Facenda's gravelly, oh so cool, timeless voice, that is the era he's reflecting. And it was the first era that really gave shape to image. The Raiders and silver and black, and their defense, 11 angry men. The Cowboys, of course, the computerized Cowboys and everything else, right? So when the Raiders, who were the Pirates, played the computerized Cowboys, oh boy, everybody was excited, okay? Um, Far less so today. Now there is a boring sameness among the teams. Everything is distilled to more to an individual level, where you have the Patrick Mahomes types, and then Travis Kelsey's dating, uh, or excuse me, engaged to be married to Taylor Swift, and it's all about the individual celebrity. But the team, the team in that image, right? Frank says, "Rest in peace to the pride of Savannah." Absolutely, just 3 hours from me here. And you know what bothers me, Frank, is that last time I saw George was at the 2016 training camp. I went with Greg Jones, Godfather Grizz, and um, one other person. And George gave me his number to call him down here, and I kept meaning to follow up on it because I always knew I would see George, because I saw him so much in Oakland. And there would be like weeks ago, I say, okay, I got to call Lord George this week and call him and call him and call him. Folks, when you have an idea of calling somebody, call them because you don't know when you're going to get the call to leave. And it's going to make you feel like I feel like now, which is I feel like shit. Just because I remember hearing something about George. I didn't know if George lived in Las Vegas. I knew he lived in Savannah, but I didn't know that he was sick. George is 78 years old. Um, I know that he's hurting. He lost his sons. He's had some hard things happen to him of late. But something that should have happened to him by now is an induction to the NFL Hall of Fame. And I think that should be a target for us. We have a few too many legendary Raiders who are not in the Hall of Fame who make up the Raiders' DNA. And I know if Mark heard me say this, he would be 100% agreement. Amy Trask, I understand, is moving up the ladder regarding the 2006 NFL Hall of Fame. But Ray Chester, tight end, prototypical tight end. How many times have you heard that phrase? But Ray Chester was the prototypical pass catching, blocking tight end. He was Russ Francis, arguably before Russ Francis. And if you remember Russ Francis with the New England Patriots, who later played with the Niners, all right? Um, and and of course Phil Villapiano. I remember I was on a flight, United flight. This was 1978. And I happened to be sitting next to a man named Lou Erber. And if you know Raider lore, you know who I'm talking about. It's Coach. He had a book. And the book was about draftees. This is how they did it in those days. Draftees, college level players they were considering, but also he had a picture of, of each player, Raider player, that formed the image of the kind of player they wanted to bring in. That was the Raider DNA. George Atkinson was one of those people. Phil Villapiano was another one. Okay? Raider DNA. Otis, all right? Raider DNA. Google AI says Raider DNA has to do with family lineages, family members who played for the Raiders. No, that's not Raider DNA. Okay? Frank says, tell me about that. But sadly, George and Jack will never get in the Hall of Fame. And Frank, that should change. You know what I'm saying? They should get in the Hall of Fame. And for Frank, for you to be right means that the NFL will never really embrace the game that it put on the field. And look, technology is advanced. We know better how these hits affect us, and we have the technology to help us, right? That doesn't mean we should ignore the past. If anything, to sweep it under the rug just means that the NFL is sending a message that, look, we were really doing something bad, and we don't want anybody to think of us that way. When in point of fact, everybody thinks of the NFL that way. Period. You know, you can't, and then you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. What's the famous play, Frank, that George Atkinson will forever be known as being a part of? The Immaculate Reception. Frank says, you're absolutely correct about Mr. Chester. Yeah, Ray, my friend, I just got off the phone with Ray Monday. I told him I'm restarting my effort. I had an effort still to get him in the Hall of Fame. I'm going to do it a different way this time, a better way. Ray Chester should be in the Hall of Fame. But for him to not be in the Hall of Fame, I mean, look, Kellen Winslow's in the Hall of Fame. Ray Chester was Kellen Winslow before Kellen Winslow, all right? Ray Chester was Kellen Winslow before Kellen Winslow. Dave Casper's in the Hall of Fame. Ray Chester ran similar routes, longer routes, all right? But I love Dave Casper. Dave Casper he used to handle my 401k. So, well, but we have to get these folks in the Hall of Fame. Amy, I remember I used to be afraid of Amy, truth be told, because she really did have a sort of Prince of Darkness persona, right? She was more owl than owl for a time. And I always thought how I thought Amy was going to be was not who she was. I had just never worked directly with her, say for one time. But that changed after I had the opportunity to talk with her at a function thrown by actually at a function thrown for my friend Phil Tagami some years ago, our mutual friend. And in 10 seconds, I realized I was totally wrong about Amy, and I loved her to death. Well, the time I saw her before that was when she was working for the Raiders, and she did something that really warmed my heart, kind of on the way to our encounter later at Phil's function. I was sitting on a plane on the way to the Super Bowl in Atlanta, and she came over. She tucked out of the blue. She gets a pillow and she tucks my head in. Hey, can you put that up again? You were saying you wrote something and I didn't see it. I have to go and look at, see if I can look on the screen because the trouble is when I do this on here, it's hard for me to. It doesn't show it in which you wrote clearly again. That's sorry about that. But at any rate, Amy then later came on my programs, and but what I remember about Amy was that Amy truly understood what Al Davis was trying to accomplish. She represented him exceptionally well. Um, there was never any light between what Al Davis wanted and what Amy Trask wanted. And that's the best compliment you can pay anybody who is hired to represent a person. All right? That's what that's the compliment I pay Amy. And she handled her job with the greatest aplomb. And I remember when we were trying to pitch the Super Bowl, we're not trying, we were pitching the Super Bowl to Oakland, and we were one of the three finalists. Uh, the Raiders had a dual persona. To the press, they're kind of like, well, you know, we have this lawsuit with them and yada, yada, yada. But behind the scenes, they were really nice to me. They did open their doors. And Amy, and this is where the so-called journalists got it wrong, because they could have asked me, all right, and that's why I started my media company, because of the way that some of the media treated me. Frank says, I question any Hall of Famer that has Kurt Warner and Jim Plunkett out. Yeah, Kurt Warner in and Jim Plunkett out. Yeah, Jim Plunkett should be in. That's the other thing. Jim Plunkett should be in. I have to add him to the list. Jim Plunkett should be in. That's wild. Jim Plunkett is not in the Hall of Fame. See, that's crazy. All right? That's crazy. There's a whole list of people I've got to add to that. Jim Plunkett is not in the Hall of Fame. Absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts. See, I have this photograph I have to add. Well, you know what? There's a lot of people. There's people to add. So, Jack Tatum. We have work to do. We have a lot of work to do, and I'm glad. I put it out there, because people are going to say, "Hey, look, add this person and that person." Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, Jim Plunkett is not in the Hall of Fame, and yet Kurt Warner is. That's weird. Lester Hayes. Thank you. Lester Hayes is not there. Yep. And Lester was one of the best quarterbacks in NFL history. And if you say, hey, he did it because of Stickum, he wasn't the only person to use Stickum. He just did it better than other people. All right? That man, I mean, it was a psychological advantage for him, the Stickum. A psychological advantage. You know, we need to get a lot more Raiders in the Hall of Fame. And that's what I'm saying. I listed 3 on this other video for this live stream. So yeah, 4. But there are a lot more. And we have enough people between Oakland, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas to really, and nationwide. The Raider fans are all over Houston, for example, to really make a difference. And really, there's one voice, you know. My attempt may be clumsy, but somebody's got to do something, right? Somebody's got to do something. Someone's got to do something. Yeah, and I don't want to do it by myself either. Okay, so in terms of what they're saying about George, he was born January 4th, 1947, passed away October 27th, yesterday. And George Henry Atkinson II. Wikipedia says that George Henry Atkinson II was an American football player who was a safety and return specialist for the Oakland Raiders of the American Football League and National Football League from 1968 to 1977. He was born in 1947 in Savannah, Georgia. Children was George Atkinson II and Josh Atkinson. And there's now the cause of death was just posted by someone here. um, and it's he was it's a they said the cause of death has not been announced, and they said Atkinson spoke candidly about living with symptoms associated with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a brain condition linked to repeated head trauma. Uh, and I will say one thing about George. For me, um, never showed effects of that. I think I'll just say this. At the time there were times when, for example, George would tell people he had an office at Raider headquarters, and he didn't. And that was an issue with some people. This was way back in the '90s, and I said to someone, "Well, he's a Raider legend. Why not give him an office? Why not give him some little place he can call home to make him feel like he's a part of this, right?" Um, if he gets upset about something like that, and then someone says, "Oh, that's because of CTE," that's not CTE. That's just simply being mistreated. All right. I mean, you have to understand something about the trajectory of pro football over the time that I've been alive. It has went from in the '60s it was becoming interesting, to the '70s it was the national pastime. First decade of being a national pastime. The '80s getting to the point where, yeah, now such a national pastime that they could call Sunday, basically they could basically say we own Sunday, and we know it went from there. The Super Bowl became a national holiday unofficially, and now we're in the era where money's involved with it, are in the billions, many billions. The Dallas Cowboys are worth $10 billion. The Raiders are worth $6 billion. Those are numbers unimaginable in the '60s. Frank says George previously agreed to donate his brain as science for elite for CTE research. Oh, great. Okay. Um, but my point is that for all of that, because I know some other players, I'm not going to mention, who are friends of mine, who also have the same problem. Who they're struggling, all right, and they shouldn't be. Um, there should be a multi-billion-dollar fund for NFL players. I mean, multi-billion-dollar fund to take care of NFL players. Everything from on-call medical help, hotline for people to talk to, people to visit them, uh, other NFL current players, alumni that are just getting out. Maybe they're down on their luck, they can't find a job. Give them a job as a liaison to another NFL alum who needs help. Stuff like that. Okay. Um, we have to do better by these heroes, because we were kids. Those are the folks we looked up to, and that's the same thing today. All right. We should never make. George didn't want to feel like he was discarded at a time, just like all NFL players. Where football was huge, and what then the team he was with and had a key role in developing the image of. There were times he felt I didn't have my place. I know for a fact Mark Davis did a fantastic job of making up for that. Okay, and Mark is to be applauded for that many times over. Um, many times over. Okay, many times. Um, we have to help these folks. We have to help our NFL heroes. Yeah, and Shiros too, because there are women who worked in the league at pioneer roles. We should know who they are. They, there are a number of people who have contributed in different ways. Um, Not similar to Amy, and we don't hear about. Um, and arguably are paving the way for people like Jameer Say's daughter. Okay, So I was thinking about an old NFL program. It was called NFL Great Teams, Great Players, Great Teams, Great Players. It used to come on in the 80s. It had that, but you always tuned in to watch the heroes at work and also learn about the heroes of the past, like Dick Butkus, rest in peace. Walter Payton, rest in peace. Cliff Branch, rest in peace. And there are other Raiders we haven't talked about. Remember Mark Van Egan, Pete Banaszak, Clarence Davis, Henry Lawrence, Mickey Marvin. We know about Shell and Upshaw. They're in the Hall of Fame, as well they should be. But they need company. They need company. So let's get going on this. Let's get going on this. Let's get our Raider legends in the Hall of Fame, one and all. Thank you. Both players and front office. See ya. All right. Morris Bradshaw. Great player, great front office guy. See ya.